I want to talk about another approach to interreligious dialogue. Rather than setting up religions in terms of inclusivism or exclusivism, this approach uses conversation as its basis. I'm going to draw heavily upon the work of Anglican scholar Gerald McDermott, who writes as an evangelical to evangelicals, which I think is a tougher way to go about this. Often when I teach courses on religion and diversity, I will start with this claim of what does an evangelical have to say about interreligious dialogue, because we're not well known for that. However, Gerald McDermott takes this very interesting approach. He recognizes exclusivism and inclusivism as the main frameworks by which Christians seem to frame out interreligious dialogue, and proposes a third way, or a broadened conversation. And so he'll set up the parameters of what an interreligious conversation should look like. And that's what I want to explore in this little video. The big problem with the other models is that really they come down to a mere tolerance, or proposing that we begin the conversation or the dialogue from a basis of religious tolerance. And the problem is that, especially when we look at notions of exclusivism, we're really not satisfied by tolerance. And we don't want to be tolerated, we want to be understood, and we want to make a valuable contribution to the conversation. And if we can recognize that everyone who participates in interreligious dialogue wants to do the same thing, wants to be respected and understood and be participant in this conversation, then we have the grounds for what we would call a good conversation. The Roman Catholic Church has defined this good conversation with a very helpful phrase as a mutual search for truth. Together with our brothers and sisters from other religious traditions, we can search together for truth. That's not the end of the story, it's the beginning of the journey. And so that when we can recognize that we have a common foundation there in the search for truth, the mutual search for truth, then that allows us to recognize that each one of us probably has a significant contribution to make to that. Hopefully. What I like about Gerald McDermott's approach is that he's insisting that when we come into interreligious dialogue, we bring our full selves into the conversation. Anything less than that is inauthentic. And so that's a profound starting point for real conversation to happen. So I want to insist that there are at least three parts to a good conversation. So the first is that we commit to hearing each other, to hearing the other in their own framework. This is why I start with Gadamer's quote, because it is about not becoming the other, but actually hearing what the other has to say out of their framework. And so one of the things to recognize is that within a religious framework especially, there is an inner coherency that makes sense to the person who participates within that religion. It mediates or explains to them their experiences, their faith, and these are incredibly powerful commitments that we make. So that's the first aspect of it. The second aspect is that we need to bring our own selves into that conversation. Just as we expect the other to bring themselves into the conversation, we bring our full selves into the conversation. And that we do this as truthfully as we can. And so that when we talk to another person and there's exclusivist parts of the particularities of our religion, well, those parts aren't just kind of brushed aside in the effort to have a conversation. Those things are part of the contribution that we make to the conversation, even though they may cause tension. The tension in the conversation is actually where we can find who we are and discover what it is that we bring into that conversation. And so we shouldn't see tension as something that just needs to be resolved, but tension is actually a creative aspect of the conversation, which leads me to the third aspect, which is when we enter into such conversations, we do so making ourselves vulnerable. In other words, we open ourselves up to conversion, to not turning into the other, but to being changed as our understanding of both ourselves and the other grows. So we often, and this is what happens more often than not, we discover more about ourselves and we discover more about our own faith in learning about the faith of the other. We understand why things are important to us. And finally, I would like to add that when we enter into this conversation, it is the real place that we can find patterns of cooperation, where we can find the ways that we can work together towards a common goal. So there are many projects in this world that need our attention, that need our cooperation to work towards. So interreligious dialogue becomes this ethical imperative for us. But the way that it's usually framed puts us at odds with one another. But what we're doing here in opening up a conversation is that we are saying that we bring the tools and the resources from our particular tradition to bear on the problem, whether it's ecological problems, racial problems, other social problems, but we're bringing those to bear on the problems in concert with others who may have similar tools, but may also bring different tools. And so that what this does is it opens up a dialogue that can expand our sense of the resources available from religion to work towards the social good of the world. So I want to leave you with a question to ponder as you head into the weekend. And that question is, looking at these different ways that people have been approaching interreligious conversation, what things do you think are lacking? What things do you think we are missing in terms of the imperative towards having interreligious dialogue, tools that could help us in interreligious dialogue, or even barriers that we're ignoring in terms of interreligious dialogue? And so I'm inviting you to bring those to the blog, and we will have a conversation about those things.